We know Eggman as an evil genius with a vast arsenal of weaponry and an army of drones, a classic supervillain. But how does he keep getting away with his world domination attempts? Why is he not brought to justice once and for all? And how can he afford all this stuff? The events on the Mirage Express does shine some light on these questions in a way we haven't really seen before. To summarize, I think you are paying for it. Now, I don't mean you personally, I mean the equivalent of you as a representative of our society in the society we see in Sonic's world, which seems to be very similar to ours. For the purpose of this analysis, we're going to assume that the social and economic structures in Sonic's world are similar to those in ours, which does seem like a reasonable assumption from what we know. So, we're witnessing Amy's birthday, which takes place on the Mirage Express, a high-tech luxury train on which a murder mystery has been arranged. What makes this encounter with Sonic and his friends a bit different than usual is that we're witnessing them interact in a casual environment, where the future of the world is not at stake. This allows us to get a glimpse of the world that Sonic is constantly saving, and as it turns out, we learn a bit about some of Eggman's more mundane undertakings as well. Now, many times have we seen parts of Eggman's operations that does not seem to be directly connected to his world domination activities. We have the oil refineries, we have the theme parks, and we have the casinos, but there is one small detail on the Mirage Express that solidifies the theory that these areas are in fact legitimate businesses. In the casino car, we find casino chips with Eggman's face on. Tails says that it doesn't surprise him given Eggman's widespread casino operations. Now, we already knew about Eggman's casinos, but the fact that finding a casino chip with his face on it does not raise suspicion is the interesting part. It tells us that the railway company has done business with Eggman, which comes as no surprise to Tails and is apparently no reason for concern. This strongly suggests that Eggman's businesses are in fact legitimate. Now, how is this possible? The arguably most dangerous person in the world, with world domination on the agenda, seems to have complete freedom to operate. To answer that, we probably have to ask ourselves, is Eggman a criminal? We are observing Eggman through the eyes of Sonic. We know him well. We know that he is in fact a villain in every sense of the word. But the question is, does he commit any crimes? Let's go back to our first encounters with Eggman. Aside from trying to kill Sonic, which could probably be argued as being done in self-defense, he is snatching innocent animals and turning them into evil robots. Let's look at this from a purely legal perspective. Are you allowed to capture wild animals? In most places in the Western world, the hunt for wild animals is heavily regulated. You are not allowed to freely capture wild animals on your own accord. With that said, in America alone, millions of wild animals are captured each year as part of damage and disease control programs, population regulation activities, wildlife management efforts, and research studies. Now, it is not made clear whether or not Eggman has his hunting certificate with him, but we can't rule out the possibility that Eggman does in fact have government-issued permission to capture forest critters. We would have to assume that turning animals into evil robots fits into the research studies category. And just as with animal hunting, animal testing is heavily regulated. But that doesn't necessarily exclude private actors such as Eggman from getting permission. In the UK, for example, about a quarter of the total animal research is carried out by commercial organizations. So maybe the promise of a new efficient fossil-free power source were incentive enough to grant him permission. Okay, I think I made my point by now. From what we know from our first encounter with Eggman, we cannot know for sure if he's actually a criminal. Now, if you're a Sonic fan, you probably wonder why I'm going on about this one wrongdoing as if he hasn't committed countless super obvious crimes later. Well, Eggman is clearly a criminal, but from what we know, it's probably safe to assume that this hasn't always been the case. In order to build his technocratic empire, he had to start acquiring funds the traditional way, through legitimate businesses. So, aside from how Eggman is acquiring funds for his empire, we learn something that is probably even more worrisome for the inhabitants of Sonic's world. It turns out that the Mirage Express is created by Eggman, 32 years ago. That information on its own is not that scary, but apparently this is not the only train that is Eggman made. In the closing statement from the Microwave Master, we're made aware of the scale of this infiltration. Let's examine this statement. Cities realized Eggman was running the train system and fought back to seize control. This strongly implies that the government had struck a deal with Eggman concerning critical infrastructure such as public transportation in multiple cities. The statement implies that the cities were not aware that the train system was run by Eggman. This could mean that Eggman used a straw man to close the deal, but assuming that we were correct in the assumption that Eggman did in fact run legitimate businesses previously, my guess is that it was a legitimate agreement between Eggman and the government. Remember, this was done over 30 years ago, and that the government's public statement regarding the incident was intentionally deceptive for them to save face, now that Eggman has emerged as a full-fledged criminal. Now, in the government's defense, they probably bought a self-maintaining system from Eggman. It was probably not an ongoing service arrangement, as that would probably have to be cancelled as soon as Eggman turned out to be a danger to the entire world. But even if Eggman was not actively maintaining the railway system, he apparently still had the ability to control the trains when he chose to do so. Now, this begs the question, what other parts of the world's critical infrastructure has Eggman infiltrated? Shipping services, the pharmaceutical industry, the military. Governments often choose business partners based on a method called procurement, often realized as a bidding process between relevant suppliers. The supplier that can deliver the specified goods or services at the lowest price gets the deal. This method is used to allow free competition between suppliers and reduce the risk of corruption, as well as to give the government a chance to get the best deal possible. From what we hear from Eggman regarding the train system, he didn't seem to care about the money. He just needed the city's infrastructure to work to facilitate his future conquests. This means that as long as he fulfills the specified requirements, he is sure to win the deal, since he doesn't care about financial profit. So let's say Eggman acquires his funds from oil and gambling etc. and then invests some of that money into infiltrating the world's infrastructure by offering efficient technical solutions at zero profit. Given that we know how efficient Eggman can be, and that he has been doing this since over 30 years ago, he could potentially have infiltrated a significant portion of the world's infrastructure. This brings us to the last question. Why hasn't Eggman been brought to justice for his crimes? This is a complex question that we cannot answer with certainty, but we can definitely conclude that Eggman is an extremely difficult enemy to battle, due to his involvement in the world's infrastructure. Even if there's an armed conflict between two parties, it is not necessarily feasible to completely cut off the supply of essential goods and services between these two parties. In the case with Eggman against the rest of the world, Eggman would have the choice to either severely cripple the world's infrastructure or being actively funded during the conflict. To conclude this analysis with an observation, what we learn on the Mirage Express further explains why Eggman despises Sonic so much, despite being openly impressed with his abilities and perseverance. Sonic cannot be bought or bargained with, because Eggman has no leverage on him. Which means that as of now, Sonic and his friends are Eggman's only true adversaries.